All right, let's talk about DOUBLELIFTS video. So people who haven't seen it, you're gonna see it right now. Just for the sake of speed, because I don't have that much time right now, I'm gonna speed it up to 1.5 times or 1.25 times. Let's just watch this. I'll talk a little bit about it.
The most incredible moment in the history of League is Faker's Z play. I could go into detail about all the reasons why it was so insane, but the main point is that it showed the world a level of skill they'd never seen.
Sorry.
The most incredible moment in the history of
League, the
is
editing
Faker's
is
Z play.
phenomenal. Good job,
I could go
Ian,
into
for
detail
this.
about all the reasons why it was so insane, but the main point is that it showed the world a level of skill they'd never seen. Not only was this the best 1v1 of all time, but it inspired countless players to play mid or specialize in Z, and specialize is probably the most fitting word to describe many of the reasons why League is so compelling to watch and play. You can't get good at everything, so pick something you think is fun and go off of that. This isn't just my personal opinion. Riot Games lead designer Greg Street recently said the same thing.
I think the best thing to do is just pick a champion that you're excited about. Even though League has 140-something champions, when you're just learning the game, you probably want to pick one or two and play a lot of games on that character.
This is fast
really
forward.
kind of understand the basics there.
There are tons of examples of players who became famous for their mastery of a single champion.
Yes.
But what happens when you nerf something people are invested in, or flat out remove it from the game? Let's take a look at the most recent example, the Aatrox rework. After seeing competitive play 3 games worldwide from 2015 to 2017, Aatrox started becoming a viable pick again, but he was due for a makeover. That was much to the disappointment of people that had been playing him. A Korean challenger Aatrox main actually wrote an emotional post on Reddit in a language he wasn't fluent in, just to vent his frustration to the community. He also had a hilarious ending note, but the main point is that some people just didn't want to see him gone.
So long, partner.
It leads to the question, why couldn't Riot just keep the old Aatrox and make a new champion with the new kit? One plays like Riven and one plays like Tryndamere, so why did something have to be removed for something else to be added? Loss aversion refers to the theory that losing feels twice as bad as winning feels good. Would you rather gain $100 or avoid losing $100?
This was
Most people would choose to avoid the loss, despite
this is
the
really
result being
interesting.
the same. Anecdotally, losing an LCS creates a much more powerful feeling than winning for me.
He
Marketers have
took a
used this for
lot of
decades to get you to buy their products.
whatchamacallit.
You can't miss out on a limited sale because you're
He took
losing
a lot
out on
of
something like that. So what does this have
whatchamacallit.
to do with the game's constant changes? When things get nerfed or removed from the game, especially champions, it feels like you lost a big investment.
Insight from
The vast majority of
other.
players won't be able to access
I think it's called core gamers. Core
The fun of the
gaming.
game mainly comes from feeling skilled. It doesn't feel good.
Really
when
interesting how they talk about fighting games.
Taken away.
Liberty. We'll go with that.
I can't play the fucking game!
In the infamous patch 8.11, people who've played League with the expectation that at least they know how to play bot lane were logged into metagame chaos, or hell, as Prey would put it. Let's talk about pro players. We're often ambassadors for the game. Without the fans, none of us would have jobs, so keeping the game fun for everyone is super important. It's also hard to be negative without damaging the brand of League or the LCS. But the truth is pros, along with casual players, are really affected by the constant changes. Pushing out a patch every 2 weeks creates a need for more practice than we would need to do otherwise. Do you ever wonder why it's so rare for LCS players to stream nowadays? It's because we're scrimming 12 hours a day to keep up with the rapidly changing meta. The most popular players are often the best performing, and we don't get many opportunities to promote the game we play all day. As much as it hurts to say, Fortnite quickly blew up in popularity. The content creators playing Fortnite were a huge reason for its growth, showing off skills for new players to be excited about and having fun too.
It's sad that he made this video, and during the time it took his editor to edit,
the game's popularity.
Ninja got
one
1
of the
million
best and
subscribers
most
on
popular players
YouTube.
in Europe literally benched himself because the meta change was so severe that a top laner could do his job better than he could. But if there's not as many changes, what if the meta becomes stale and repetitive? It sounds like I'm just complaining about changes, and as Kozak says,
Change is good.
first, there's plenty of examples of games with vibrant and passionate communities that have largely been the same for decades. StarCraft Brood War is a game so competitive and popular that it pioneered modern esports. From release in 1998 until MSL Finals in 2007, the Protoss vs Zerg matchup, otherwise known as PvZ, was considered heavily Zerg favored. With a game that had 3 major balance updates over nearly a decade, the meta was pretty well understood. As the Protoss player and heavy underdog, Bisu played against Savior, a bonjour, which is a Korean term used to describe a godlike player. Against all odds and in a terrible matchup, Bisu upset Savior 3-0 with a build that no one had ever seen before. Earning his nickname, the Revolutionist, he single-handedly turned the PvZ meta around. After the creation of the Bisu build, PvZ was a Protoss-sided matchup.
To give the PvZ matchup before Bisu versus Savior. I have statistical evidence behind this that it was between 53-54% win rate for the Zerg matchup. And then when Bisu developed his Corsair DT style, or more generally his Corsair opening, that nowadays he does Corsair Speed Zealot, it actually flipped 10% differential. So it went from about 54% win rate for the Zerg down to about a 44 to 45% win rate. Like, Zergs did not know what to do, dude.
Metas can be broken and change with a mix of creativity and game knowledge over time. The key here is time, because it does take a while before the best players will develop to the point where things like that can happen. Like I mentioned before, League is a game about skill, and Faker's play shows just how amazing the highest level of skill can be. Everyone's on the journey towards mastering something in the game, even Jandomaids. Too many changes can reset your progress in that journey. Just to make things clear, I'm not against patches. I think the other end of the spectrum is a developer that doesn't do enough, and then we'd just be PUBG. I think that there should be more of a focus on buffing what's weak than cutting down what's strong. and that bigger but much more spaced out patches will let the game develop and feel less scrambled. This is inevitably going to bring up the topic of power creep, which I'll save for another video. Dota 2 recently had the reverse of this happen, going from big, occasional patches to smaller, more frequent ones. You can imagine how the pro players responded to it. Last, it's important to address the elephant in the room. League's viewership and popularity in North America is going down. I don't think the game is dead at all, but if Riot reduced how often patches came out, pro players would make more content and push the skill ceiling, while casual players could find their stride and see more incredible esports moments. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Okay, so I spent this long, and right now we're gonna break down his points, and we'll talk about them. Okay,
So pick an
so
example.
we'll talk about reworks, Aatrox.
The Aatrox rework.
Well, I guess first of all, my initial impressions are, this is probably the best piece of content editing plus approach that a person's done in a long time. In terms of top tier league content, this is like at the very peak. It's very difficult to do stuff like this because you may, like, I like the editing a lot. The time that this guy put into the editing must have been like a long fucking time. And to be honest, without the reach of Doublelift, it might not have been as explosive, and it probably wouldn't have been worth it for the editor to do it. Doublelift's able to make this video because, like, you know, he already has an established fan base on top of his like really good, you know, well-spokenness. You know, he's very succinct with what he wants to say, whereas I tend to ramble. This is a great piece of like A S tier plus content. But the reason why you don't see a lot of this is because it's usually not worth it for the content creators. Like, for the most, there is a tangible value to creating new, unique, high quality content, but usually it's not backed up by the YouTube algorithm or by any kind of monetization. So just letting you know. So this will be kind of interesting. So first of all, yeah, I talked about this a little bit as I started streaming before, but usually this is like one of the first content pieces which I like to respond to. And the reason is because it's like, usually I don't like talking about like the idea of like the viability of champions, or like the like how to do like an optimal funnel is not interesting to me. I tend to like be more interested in like unique ideas and concepts like what's talked about here. And so a lot of times when I see people make content, good content, stuff like Blitz esports stuff, where it's like high quality production, but their content is about like certain strategies in the game, it's not as appealing to me to talk about as stuff like this. So I'm very happy to see stuff like this, because now I have something to talk about, and I can create an infinite content loop just regurgitating his stuff and making reaction bits. Perfect. I'm gonna be rich from Doublelift. Thank you. God bless. Anyways, so I guess one of the things to talk about is reworks, and I think that Riot got really unlucky with the Aatrox rework. Super unlucky, because had Aatrox not been competitively viable with the week, like for the first time ever in the weeks coming into I guess his rework, literally the first time in like 2-3 years, there wouldn't have been that much of an outcry on the champion. And to be honest, I think that Aatrox pretty much needed the rework. I felt that he was kind of, it's not so much, and this is something that I will probably need to think about a little bit more, but there is this idea that there's a mechanics creep in the game, where the idea of the average skill of the player is so much higher than it was before, that the very like boring champions who only do like one thing on their ability are kind of getting phased out of the game. A good example is stuff like I would say Annie is a pre-rework Warwick. It's like a very much like, I guess, low skill expressive champion that rewards everything but your mechanics. Like, it will reward like your ability to like see the play, like your macro sense, your game sense, your game knowledge, but you can literally play like champion with like one finger. And to be honest, the new Warwick, you probably need two. So it's not like the mechanics went up that much, but there's an idea that for instance, like I know there's this running idea that people want this game to be like super high skill expressive. Like, if it's a long skill shot, a long CC, it has to be a skill shot. Fatal Fear is a really good example of stuff like that. And I think there needs to be, people need to be careful about that. I think there should be entry level, low mechanically skilled requiring champions. Stuff like Annie, for instance, like old Warwick, but maybe not like old Aatrox, although he is not that skill expressive as well. There needs to be stuff like that in the game because like not everyone, just to have a good balance across the cast. Because I think like right now the biggest thing that League should try to do, and the number one thing that League should be good for, is the idea that the game should be able to be played in many different ways, with many different champions, many different styles. Like when I think of a perfectly balanced League of Legends, or like a really high balanced League of Legends, it's got the most champion diversity possible. It's got the most styles of play possible that aren't, and it's got like a player base that is able to play a wide variety of different types of champions fluidly. Now, usually what happens in metas that I really dislike are metas that are so oppressive that no other meta can exist. Stuff like this funnily is not, it's kind of oppressive. It's not super oppressive, but it's kind of bad. Ardent is a good example of a meta where it's like, well, I guess we just stack the AD and make him God. And you can't play another kind of style into that because Ardent is so strong. And so I want to see a meta where like essentially you're able to do that. And I think that we need to be careful about reworking champions to the point where we're looking to just like take away low mechanically skilled champions for no reason. And I think a good example for that is a really great example of that is Nunu. So like Nunu and Master, like Nunu is a champion that's going to be reworked. Yes, Nunu could be cooler. Like for sure, you can make Nunu cool. Like he could be wearing like, I don't know, he could be a steampunk like champion Nunu, like, or like he could be like he could have shades on. He could have like cool abilities that one shot people. But he's a champion that, in my opinion, didn't need to be reworked. Because I think that like his kit is not super impressive. It's valuable to have in the game. He's not very strong. He for the most part, he rewards like I guess kind of low mechanical play, but like high brain play. And he can be fit in certain comps and do very well in. Like he's got a niche where no one else can kind of replace him, in the sense that he can make an AD really, really strong with his W, or to some extent make an AP very strong. Let's ignore funneling with Nunu. Like before that became super popular, like generally the idea of Nunu is the fact that like he's this like frontline tank that can't really do much. He snowballs you, ulti is cool. But I think that he's a champion I would have pushed really far back for a rework. There's a lot of other champions that I think could use reworks before him, like stuff like Mordekaiser, stuff like either really problematic champions. Like for like a lot of the assassins got just messed up, right? I've loved to see some reworks on some of them. I would have loved to see like maybe I like the Urgot rework. I thought that was very key. So generally, like the thing that I think should happen is that you should be reworking champions that are both underplayed, as well as like their kits feel very bad to play. And I think that champions like Nunu didn't really have the second part. Yeah, and I don't even necessarily know if he's that underplayed. I think Riot should just be very careful about reworking champions that don't need to be reworked. However, I think that there are so many champions in the game that they should focus. I don't mind the idea of reworks. In fact, I encourage reworking a lot of champions. I think that it's fine. But I do understand that change is scary. And the idea of having such high patch frequency, which with such high rework frequency can cause really, really bad problems with the player base, especially for the player base of the champions that are for the people who play those champions. It's doubly bad because in this game, people are encouraged to play a small subset of the champions. It'd be a different story if it was like, hey, I'm Scarra, I'm known for, 6 different, 7 different, 19 different picks, 20 different picks. I play just random shit. And if my favorite champion gets nerfed or reworked, I don't really care. But the way that you climb up to like play and the way that you tend to, like what Doublelift said, specialize in a small subset of champions. By losing a champion you invest so much time in, it feels extra bad. So I think a lot of the problem with reworks is like, I guess, compounded on by the fact that there's a lot of patch frequency change, and that specialization is typically rewarded, highly rewarded for this game. All right, let's talk about patch frequency. I think it's really interesting because I think casual players want there to be a lot of change, and when I'm streaming, I tend to like this change a lot. And the thing is, I realize I tend to like change if the meta is really bad. But if the meta is really good, I don't like that much change. However, I think it's hard for Riot to figure out like what meta is ideal and what meta isn't. And the thing is, that may be completely different in competitive games than it is for competitive than it is for casual players. I think that's really, really, really difficult to differentiate from. So in the current patch, like this is, I would say that we have done too much too quickly. The mid-season, like I understand the idea of having big patches and it negatively affects the competitive player base. Completely understand that, cool. But let's not even focus on that, because I'm focused on the actual growth of the game, or the more like growth and fall of the game. So Doublelift's argument is that if there weren't as many patches, pro players could then look to do more content, which allows them to loop back into making the game grow. I don't think that's the case. I would say that the want for the idea of pro player content is streaming, right? I think that maybe yes, streamers would stream more, that pro player longevity would increase because they don't have to constantly adapt to a new game. And I think even on a casual level, I don't necessarily know if 2 weeks is good. And to be like, outside of streaming content, what actual content do pro players put out? Pretty much nothing. Like across the board, nothing. And even then, like streaming wise, most pro players don't stream. Like, or like I would say like maybe half do, which is still like not that much. But yeah, I don't think that's his point either. I think that it does. I guess the most important thing I want to say about patch frequency is the fact that you can get. I think that before in other seasons I was okay with patch frequency, but only in the current seasons does it feel like it's crazy, and a lot of that stems off the fact that, you know, scuttle changes happen on top of bot lane changes switching so dramatically to APs. And so you essentially had two insane patches back to back. And to be honest, I'm still struggling to be able to wrap my head around it. I don't really understand how to fully jungle with this. Like playing bot lane, playing mid lane, playing jungle. My games are a complete trash. Like trash can experience a lot of times. And it's very similar because as the patch kind of gets consolidated, I think the average game length goes longer because people know what to do, people know what to expect, and people know like how the game is expected to be played. If you're watching a lot of streamers' games right now, watch my own game. See, ignore this Gragas game, this Pike game, 15 minutes over. You know, I had like maybe half my games be like that in the last week or two, and that happens a lot during the mid-season and the preseason. I don't know if people really remember how the mid or preseason worked, but it's just like people try out all kinds of random shit and the games are literally 20 minutes because people are doing stupid stuff nonstop. And I think right now people are still, it's like we're still in preseason. And we're on week 4 of the LCS and people are still finding out new things. People like Smite mid coming back in full force. The idea that like mid laners now have to play Aatrox and Morgana and Talon with Smite. The idea that funneling, it was super dominant and they finally nerfed it. But now like, where's the game gonna go after the nerf, you know? The idea that like, hey, Heimer's broken. What up? 80 carries just got rebuffed, so maybe they're good again. All these changes like typically would happened during like the midseason or the preseason, and it got, because there were such big changes dramatically, it's felt extra bad this season. And I think especially as a casual player, it's almost impossible for casual players to be able to follow the current meta because it changes on a week by week basis, literally, because people are still experimenting. So like people are watching my patch rundowns and be like, Scarra, this is great, and then like the next patch rundown I'm talking about, I usually preface the patch rundown with a meta, and it's like completely different, 2 weeks apart, and then a third patch rundown where I'm just like, what is, I say the same stuff and people are just like, what the hell? It's really, really hard for especially right now, for casual players to enjoy the game because the game is just all over the place. The concept and the idea of, you know, bot lane APs, I think is very good for the longevity game. Very, very cool that you're able to do that. The problem is when it happened, it was such poor timing on top of like them changing the jungle again, which affects the mid lane dramatically, and like both, all the laners, right? Is that it just compounded into this insane situation where it's like, even if you just had one or two of the changes, that would have been an insane change. And having both at the same time means we pretty much stacked preseason or mid-season changes on top of each other and released it week after week. So I am not necessarily opposed to 2 week patch schedules. I think the idea of having, I didn't mind Riot's big patch, small patch cycle either. I think that was interesting, where it's essentially you have one big patch a month and small patches every 2 weeks. Alternatively, they can even stretch it out a bit. I don't mind. I think maybe 2 weeks is too quick. I think 3 weeks is pretty reasonable, but there's a reason why Dota 2 probably shifted to the more patch heavy cycle, because you're able to create more interest on a week by week basis, assuming the actual game isn't crazy, which unfortunately the current league ecosystem is. And so I think that a lot of this current talk about patch frequency is really applicable right now, specifically because of the current stuff. But had we talked about patch frequency in other seasons, it wouldn't nearly be as big of a problem. It's just right now it's extra fucking bad. Not gonna lie, extra fucking bad. Okay, let's talk about balance. I have always advocated for buffing what's weak. I don't think there should be a tier system of champions from S to F. Like, I think there should be a tier system of champions from A to C or S to C, where essentially like you want to encourage buffing all the really, really bad champions upwards to like the C tier. And I think C tier is like situational counterpick tier. And then you work from there. So like a good example of this buff was the idea, if people remember Volibear's quality of life E buff, the fact that he was given a small CC, the pushback helped make him a lot more consistent. And even though Volibear is still just trash can champion, Jesus Christ, this champion's like definitely tier C, it was able to pull him out of the supreme dumpster and put him in a position where it's like, hey, maybe you have a comp with Lulu and you need a fast, tanky, bear-like jungler, and every other jungler is banned. So it's like, okay, cool, well, we have to go with Volibear here, or it's possible to go with Volibear here. And I think that changes like that, or quality of life buffs like that, help out tremendously for champions. And pushing those up, like pushing those very weak champions up, is like should be, and to be honest, is what Riot's been doing probably non-stop. The idea of like small buffing champions like Volibear, small buffing champions like Lux. The Lux saw 4 buffs in a row, complete garbage can champion. Still, no offense, Lux players. And Kindred saw 4 buffs in a row and she's OP. But I think that like maybe they could have stopped like 2 buffs in. But you know what? I'm okay to live in a world where Kindred gets buffed if the overall idea is that Riot's looking to buff all these champions all the time. Vi got some small buffs. So like I would just like to see like the next thing I would like to see. You know, I think Blitzcrank sucks right now. I think a lot of it is because like other supports do what he does better. So if Blitzcrank got a quality life buff, whereas W no longer slowed himself, or his W has like a super high burst of move speed and then super slows him, so he has like very like unique play pattern, I'd be down for that, you know? And so people are talking about like power creep, but I think the general idea is like you're just standardizing the weaker picks into a power creep version of the game. Because sure, power creep does exist, but it's controllable. And the idea is that if a champion or a set of champions gets power creep, how do you fix that? You either nerf those set of champions or you buff the weaker ones. And I think that similar to what DOUBLELIFTS said, that buffing champions is a lot better than nerfing champions for sure. Oh boy. I guess there was one big thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't exactly know where I want to interject this. Let me think how I want to put this in. I guess right now we'll talk about league viewership. So I think that league viewership is, and there's no question, league viewership has been dropping since 2015. But only in North America. And so it comes to this weird problem where it's like, we're looking at all the problems for this game, all these problems for this game, because in the West, and maybe not even the West, specifically in North America, this game isn't doing very well, but it's doing extremely well in a lot of other regions, including China and a lot of Asian countries. So with all of these problems, so to speak, are they really problems? Like, we may not, and I may not like the game where it's currently at, but other regions seem to have no problems with certain things that have happened with the game. And so I can kind of understand where there's situations where I think that to some extent it's hard to see the major problems of the game because there's a lot of white noise. Even from my perspective, I just spent like what 30-40 minutes talking about this shit, right? How much of it is actually usable to Riot Games? Probably like 30% maybe. And that's pretty generous, to be honest. And there's a lot of white noise from like the casual fans, the competitive fans, and all this kind of stuff. And in the end, the number one thing that Riot looks at is like, okay, well, are we doing well? And I would say in North America, they are not. However, they're doing very well in other regions. And I know for a fact, for instance, there's and I was told this, that there was examples of situations where they've reworked certain champions and it's done really well in the West, but performed terribly in other regions, specifically the Eastern regions. And it's like, in that situation, then was the rework successful or not? How do you measure the metrics that define success in that situation? Because if you define it by just like making money or making the most amount of people happy, a rework like that did not succeed. Just stuff to think about. Lastly, and the final thing I want to talk about is the idea of oh wait, hold up. The Rex Regis, thanks for the sub. Dr. Tick, thanks for the bit donation. Bees are important to our ecosystem. I agree. Thank you so much. There's one final thing I wanted to talk about. Was it the idea of balance in the game, champion optimization? I talked about my idea of what I think about patches, about buffing, what's weak. You know what? I think that I don't have enough grasp on on it right now. I know it's super important. I'll just talk about it later. And I think that that's generally all my thoughts about the current situation of the game, as well as DOUBLELIFTS patch notes. I think that this is great. I'm very happy that it's able to bring situations like this up. I'm kind of intimidated because DOUBLELIFTS is a top tier player and now like a top tier content creator. So I'm in the struggle. But you know what? I'm very happy that other people are able to do stuff like this. I'm very, very happy. So this is really interesting. So at the very end of DOUBLELIFTS video, he says this.
I don't think Dota 2 recently had the reverse of this, but a full ceiling. Well, important to address the elephant in the room. Occasional patches to smaller, more frequent ones. You can imagine how the pro players responded to. The spectrum is a developer that towards mastering something in the game, even Janimades. The room just came out because shows just how amazing time. The key here is time, because it does take a while before the best players will develop to the point where things like that can happen. Like I mentioned before, League is a game about skill, and Faker's play shows just.
Okay, so the biggest thing that he says here is the aspect of time. So to see like how a meta works out, time is the best example for how it does, and for how I guess let me tackle this from a different approach. So generally when I stream, I tend to play pretty off meta picks. I'll play stuff like Diana. I'll play stuff like I mean, I recently haven't played this stuff, right? So maybe, but in the past, let's say I played stuff like Veigar, stuff like Lux. Like, a lot of these are really bad champions, right? And I can just say they're bad champions off the top of my head. However, a lot of these champions have very niche capability to be able to be played. And so for professional players, there's no reason for them ever to play these bad tier C champions unless they've already invested a lot of time into them, ever. And the only time you're going to see like a really wide champion diversity outside of situations where you literally blow open the 80 role or a specific role into having a lot of different picks is the idea that like, as I guess meta stabilize, there will be less, I guess there will be meta champions, viable counter picks to the meta champions and viable counter picks to the counter picks. And usually what happens is the game tends to change so much that you're never able to get to this point, because these champions, I would say, are viable counter pick to counter picks champion. So these are very, very fringe niche situations. Pro players should never practice these because the game switches so much. They're only encouraged to practice the best champions at the time because they're the best across the widest amount of situations. And so to be the best teammate that you can and to be the most versatile team that you can, you play the meta champions because you don't have the time to invest into playing either the counter pick champions or the counter pick to counter pick champions. So like a good example of that would be like, okay, I guess we can work backwards from here. So let's break this down to something that Diana is good into. So she counter picks what champions? We could just take in competitive play, she has counterpicked stuff like Xerath, and Victor, I would say, and she's also counterpicked stuff like Fizz. So I would say I play Diana a lot. Like I know she beats all three of these matchups to some degree, or that she's very playable in these three matchups, especially with assistance. She straight up smashes Fizz 1v1 and is highly playable in the other two. Victor being probably the hardest one, but still easily playable. Okay, so you're able to play Diana into these, and maybe you're able to play into Vel'Koz too. So when would you ever pick Xerath, Victor, Fizz, Vel'Koz? Well, what do these champions tend to be? Well, Vel'Koz is like, generally you pick Vel'Koz as like a zero counter pick mid lane. You pick Fizz as a counter pick to stuff like Victor, stuff like what did people play Fizz into? I don't even remember. Let's go look at mages real quick. Stuff like Talia, stuff like Soul. Oh, let's pick the Syndra a lot. Okay, Syndra, Soul, TF, Talia, sure, stuff like that. And then Victor is counter. I don't know why you counter pick. I don't play Victor, so unfortunately this is a little bit of a rough one for me. But you'll pick Xerath into stuff that you want to poke. So anything that tends to do poor into poke. So stuff like Xerath, stuff like Janna comps is what you pick Xerath into, similar to stuff like Vel'Koz. And so these champions will see. All these champions will tend to see more play as the meta is able to stabilize. The only problem is, since most of the times the meta is not able to stabilize completely, you're only able to see like SS tier picks. And very rarely do picks at the most tend to stop right here in this like first tier of counter pick section, where it never gets to the point where there's a counter pick to this section, because the only time a competitive player is gonna pick Diana into one of these four is if like they're playing a team that like plays one of these as a specific counter pick to something that they're doing. And so that's really niche, and investing 30 hours into getting this one counter pick is usually not worth it, unless there's situations where you've kind of already played all the meta picks and you're looking for something to give you that small edge against certain teams. Unfortunately, you're never able to be able to get to that point because the patch cycle is so quick. So I think that generally most competitive tournaments, you're only going to be able to see like the S tier, the A tier champions. And to be honest, some of these counterpick champions never get played because the S tier champions are just so damn good. Like so just ridiculously good, so OP that you're just never gonna see anything else. Champions like pre-nerf Zoe is a good example. You're literally not gonna see another champion because she's the best in the position, potentially best champ in the game. Pre-nerf Aurelia, rework Aurelia, Jesus Christ, you had to start counterpicking her with like Darius, and pre-nerf you still weren't guaranteed wins, to be honest. Pre-nerf Soul, pre-nerf Syndra, like even though Syndra could be counterpicked and saw like a lot of fizz into Syndra play, she was so good that like you were scared to play the counterpick like Echo or Fizz because you would have a really hard time even playing the matchup and she could explode at any moment. So there's some picks that tend to, I would say, oppress other picks. And Riot should look at those separately. I always tend to think that as we're looking to buff what's weak, the most important thing again is to bring everything up into the C tier of play, like niche counterpick play, and then nerfing the super S tier champions that oppress like a wide variety of champions. So you want to have the most amount of champions being played nonstop. And maybe I think that what Riot's done is they tend to nerf the S tier and buff other champions into S tier to have a rotating S tier list. I don't necessarily know if that's ideal, but it's certainly a interesting way of doing some things. But I think that a lot of times you're not able to see wide champion variety from competitive games because of situations where they don't get much time to work on stuff. And I 100% agree with Doublelift. Time is a very big thing. I think only when you're looking at very rare players like or rare situations like the Zyra pick at Worlds 2 years, was it 2 years ago? It might have been 3 years ago. Holy shit, that was such a long time. The AMAP pick to counter Zyra, super cool. You remember the oh god, like who he is Aurelian Soul pick, for instance. Like unless you have players that are like very much either tend to specialize or have a very silent counter pick, which by the way, Worlds is a great example of a tournament that will always have 1 to 2 to 3 counter picks. 100%. You know why? Because the patches leading up to Worlds, Riot forces stabilization. And so you will not have a changing meta for the last like 2 months leading up to Worlds. So what happens? Teams can practice very specific small counter picks to get them on the edge in certain matchups. And I think that year after year, there's always someone bringing something new. 1 or 2 things that are just like, wow, dude, I didn't expect that to work. Wow, that's way better than I thought. And I think that you don't see that a lot of times in like normal LCS play where people are learning to play like the game. And Worlds is a great example of like, you're able to see a lot of not only a lot of regionally different metas, but able to see a lot of counter picks and more champion diversity because of those counter picks, because teams are able to invest the time into playing them because they know the meta won't change. There are situations where like some of the Worlds patches have stupidly OP champions that you can't counter pick. So the Juggernaut meta with Darius and Gameplay is a good example. Right before the patch, you know, Riot was just like, by the way, I hope you guys enjoy playing Worlds on this patch, and slapped these like stupidly strong champions in the mix. But outside of that situation, and like small instances here and there, Worlds is a great example, and I would say a great kind of explanation of what happens when when teams are given a lot of time. Cool. That's all I have to say. But I hope you guys enjoyed what I had to say. I'm gonna go play some ads. I'm gonna host Cutie and then make sure Heisendon's all good.